Welcome to One Big Boat. We're all in this together. A show focused on people and organizations whose work is making a true difference in people's lives. Today, we welcome Craig Gordon and Sandra Pyram Lawyer of Communities for People.
We're working with kids who have just had really tough home situations. And for whatever the reason, whether it's domestic violence or substance abuse, child neglect, they can't stay with their parents.
That's Craig describing the challenges of working in the foster care system. They will also talk about the rewards. That's next on One Big Boat. We're all in this together.
So let's start with the big picture as we were talking about before. If somebody says to you, foster care, they may know what you do, but they really don't.
That's true. That's true because foster care can be foster care with a capital F or a small f. So Communities for People, let's call it a capital F. And we're working with kids and families in the foster care system. So that encompasses pretty much any time a child or a youth have been removed from their home. Most people are very familiar with foster homes, and that's where we want most youth who can't live with their parents to reside, especially if it's kinship foster care. So kinship foster care is a type of foster care where you are living with one of your relatives. It could also be a close friend considered as a kinship person. And people are fairly familiar with that. But it also includes all sorts of other types of programs like group homes or emergency shelters or residential treatment programs as well. So independent living, those can all be considered part of the foster care system.
Yeah. And so what we were talking, what's the stigma you find? Is that the first thing you really have to fight? Or battle out there, public perception-wise?
I think nationally we see it, and even locally, there's a lot of stigma in terms of the issues that kids may face. Kids who experience trauma demonstrate it in many different ways, and often it's sensationalized a little bit, and so that often creates a fear of kids who are in care. The other stigma that we've seen are folks who decide to open their homes to become a foster parent. There's a lot of stigma in terms of motivation, in terms of what happens in the homes. And there's the other extreme where there's stigma around, or misconceptions, if you will, around, you might find a cuddly little, newborn, and that if you want to foster, that's the only child that that you'd be open to caring for. So the range is pretty wide.
Yeah. And so how do you guys have many, I was looking on your website, you have many different programs.
We do.
So why don't we go through the programs, talk about them a little so people can get familiar with you.
Sure. So first I'll actually also say, we're not working with cuddly little babies, and hopefully those are not youth or children who make it into the foster care system. But the other side of that stigma is the kids aren't monsters either. I always sit there and say, when I was a teenager, I was probably much more a monster. So we're working with kids. We're working with kids who have just had really tough home situations. And for whatever the reason, whether it's domestic violence or substance abuse, child neglect, they can't stay with their parents. So our program specifically, we have some prevention programs. We actually really try to get to the root cause and try to prevent youth from ever needing to leave their homes. So we have several different family preservation programs where we have staff who go into those homes to try to keep everybody together and learn to work through their conflicts and learn to really discuss new ways of solving problems together so it doesn't turn into fights and arguments and major disruptions where somebody has to leave the home.
How do you find out about that family? I mean, it sounds like there had to have been like a police report or something, or something like that that's triggered that.
Very commonly. So most of our programs are referred by the state. So you're right. They've maybe had a child abuse complaint filed against them, and it hasn't been serious enough to remove the child. So the state might refer that family to our programs to try to again, work through all their different problems with them so that somebody doesn't have to leave the home. It might be the police. Sometimes we get referrals from doctors' offices, sometimes schools. So we also get community referrals. So there's a couple of different sources for that.
Yeah. And so when you go into there, how do you judge with the parent that, okay, this is a situation where the kid is safe or not? Because you don't want to be wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of how it begins, many of the families who are referred by DCF is entrusting our agency to come in and assess what the root cause is. And so if the child has not been removed by DCF, they're expecting or hoping that we would be able to work with the family to identify some of the dynamics that sort of caused the referral. And so the family is, they have strengths that we begin with, right? We start with the strengths. We start with what are the things that are working well for that family. Many times it could be a strong sense of family that's around, if it's a mom that's struggling, right? We may come in and say, wow, you have your aunt who lives close by. How do we tap into these natural supports for you so that we can begin to sort of eliminate the risk of the child needing to be removed? Often it's a skill set that the family may not have, right? If they've experienced their own trauma or their own, let's say, dysfunctional, dysfunctional patterns in terms of what parents do, they may not have the skills to be able to know how to manage difficult behaviors in kids. And so the team goes in, or the staff, they'll go in and begin to assess those dynamics and work with the family. The danger there is to not come in and say, we're the experts, we're going to show you, we're going to tell you what to do. But we begin to work with the family so that they can identify how they want to adopt some new ways of, whether it's dealing, like I said, with conflict or difficult behaviors. There are times where it's lack of resources, or it might be a unsafe relationship, or, the range is pretty wide, but it's to assess that and to help the family identify what they need so that the child doesn't go further into the system.
And this is the family preservation kind of toolbox, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that's really everything that we do with all the families. The sad part, unfortunately, is that we're not 100% successful. I wish we were. So when you think nationally, there's actually, think of this number, 369,000 children in the foster care system in the United States. That's a major city. That is, unfortunately, parenting these days is a challenge. Society is a challenge. There's so many temptations against children, parents. It's just so complicated these days that, and as Sandra pointed out, nobody's got the instruction manual on how to be a parent. So whether we're talking about the opioid problems, or we're talking about a child with severe mental health issues or behavior problems, families are under a tremendous amount of stress these days. So as much as family preservation programs are critical and they're the first line of defense, they're not always successful. So then children need to go, as I was pointing out before, into kinship care or into foster care. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the kids. There's also a lot of misconceptions about being a foster parent. A lot of times I have conversations with people and they'll say, I could never do that. And I'm like, you could. And you were a parent yourself and you did okay. Just there's sometimes a belief and a mystique, if you will, that goes with it, where you almost have to be the perfect parent. There's actually this wonderful national group that does a lot of foster parent training, and their concept is you just have to be good enough. And most of us had parents who were just good enough.
Yeah. And you know a little something about this, Sandra.
Yeah.
All right, so you're a foster parent.
Yes.
You were doing this work and then decided to become a foster parent.
Yes, absolutely.
So when you did that, did you realize, holy wow, this is a lot harder than I thought, or there's a lot more to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think being on the professional end, you get to go home and you're sort of shutting the work off a little bit. But as a foster parent, you're living it day in and day out. But like Craig said, with the support of the community that supports foster parents, you're reminded that you don't have to be perfect all the time, that we have to sort of judge and make decisions at, daily, in terms of what the best way to sort of manage situations. And so I've enjoyed fostering. Every child is different. There's no same kid, right? And every kid who comes in, even if they've experienced similar trauma histories, they're going to react differently depending on their, many different factors, including how they are demonstrate resiliency, going through life and things like that. So I definitely enjoyed it, but it's different than my professional hat that I wear.
Yeah, we talked about giving parents tools, but how about these kids? I mean, you're 8 years old and you're not with mom and dad, and that situation obviously wasn't great because you're in foster care. Right. How do you work with the kids? They go to a different school. Guess what? You're different. Everything they do is different. And that's not what kids want to be.
The sad part, and you get a great example there, Jay. One of the sad parts of foster care is whenever you're placed, it's very, very rare that you're placed once and you stay in that home. So the federal government actually helps state agencies monitor how many times a child moves. I think most states have a benchmark of 2 or 2 in the first year. We've actually talked with many of our youth that we work with who have been through 5, 6, 7 placements in a year, in 2 years. When you talk to somebody who maybe at 8 years old and now is still in the foster care system at, say, age 13 or 14 or 15, and they've been through scores of placements. Every time you move, that is a time when you left your friends, you left your school, you now went to a new school, you started forming a trusting relationship with an adult, and it's broken. So it's very high. I have nothing but respect for the kids that we are working with because they're so resilient. And if any of us probably went through similar kinds of circumstances, I know I would probably be curled up in a fetal position, like crying for my mother. So.
And we have the privilege of working with many older youth who have been in care for quite some time, right? We have youth who are getting ready to age out into independence. And so they've experienced that abrupt, disruption from their home families, probably, 5, 7 years, into their care. But they still have to manage, navigating the world, being in care. They can't just make a simple decision. They can't just, do some of the things that their peers are doing. And so I think one of the interesting ways that we help is to help them find their voice so that they can begin to identify their own identity, who they are in the world, and that it goes beyond being a youth in care, that they have certain talents, they have skills, they have, especially if they can advocate for themselves, I'll use that phrase, and that we just help them to sort of see how it's a strength so that they can use it for their benefit rather than sort of be seen as someone who's oppositional, if you will. But how do you use that as a strength to navigate the world? And so that is an interesting and rewarding part of what we do because I think that that's going to be, that is part of what they'll have to, sort of live with after they age out.
Yeah.
And go back to that 8-year-old for a minute. Yeah. Just think about, even if you were getting beaten up by mom's boyfriend or dad, or no matter how troublesome or problematic that home background was, it was still your home. And you talk to kids in foster care, they just want to go home. So, and I shouldn't say generalizations, most of the kids say they just want to go home. And even in foster care was really designed to be a temporary solution. Nobody wants to grow up in foster care. And as Sandra's pointing out, the state always will try to reunify. So if a child's been pulled out of the home, everybody is focused on trying to get them back in. And that works for most. But for the ones that it doesn't, for whatever the reason, doesn't succeed on, those are sometimes the tougher, more traumatized, more hurting, and less trusting youth. And those are the ones that we really specialize in working with.
How many foster parents do we need? Where are we? Number-wise.
One more today. One more. How about just one? Any of your listeners? We'd love to have one more today. The best way I could probably answer that is we lost over 1,000 families during the pandemic. And it's now 2024. The pandemic we're 5 years post the start of the pandemic, and we still can't come back to that level. So we need literally tens of thousands, across the country. Everybody needs foster parents. I would hope that just any number, I'm struggling with trying to actually give you a number. And the answer is more.
Yeah.
Coming up.
If a kid is removed from home, their whole world is shattered.
How does Community for People help normalize a traumatic situation?
So if you're wondering about being a foster parent, first thing, go to your website, you gotta fill out the form, do all that. We don't really need to talk about that because if somebody really wants it, it's a much more involved thing than we're gonna answer.
Yep.
But they can be a weekender, as we were saying, and I don't mean that like in a joking way, but seriously, so talk about that.
So I think, to piggyback on one thing that Craig said, and I love that, one more each day, today having one more family who decides to open their home would be amazing. And part of what we're seeing, what we know is that kids fare better, they do better in a home-like setting because they're not in a residential setting where they have to sort of compete for attention and things like that with other youth. And older kids, they're longing for that one person that will commit to them. And that, can learn them as an individual. But if somebody was interested in figuring out, say if I'm not available or I wouldn't be able to commit for long-term care, there are youth who are in foster homes who may not, for many different reasons, be able to be with that family all throughout the year. So say if a family were going on vacation, for example, and they can't take that child with them for many different reasons. And many times it's if the bio family doesn't give the permission for the youth to leave, or if they have unique needs, there's a lot of different reasons for that. A family can say, I'm interested in being almost like a or a partner family with another family so that they could be that reoccurring home that the child may go to, or that they have different youth that go through their home various parts of the year. And that's a way to support a family who is fostering on a more long-term basis.
We call that respite foster care.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of ways. If you don't want to, can't make that commitment for 7 days a week, 2 days a week might be great.
Yeah.
Or a week every few months might be great. So there's all sorts of ways to be able to help that.
Yeah. And often folks are weary about becoming a long-term foster parent because they do, worry about being sort of an island in, unto themselves, and being and feeling isolated, caring for youth. And so our team, we have constant contact with our families, and having a respite home gives you that sense that you're not in it alone, that you do get a little exhausted, you get burnt out. And so having a family who has gone through the process, was trained, is licensed, and that you can feel rest assured that the child is having that care, offers a little sense of assurance that I can take a break when I need to.
And the respite, for me, I would look at it like we all know people are struggling out there, right? And there's probably somebody with a big heart who wants to do this.
Yeah.
But it's like, there's no way I can do this 24/7, right?
Right.
So this is a way for them to dip the toe kind
Right.
of thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And whether you do it on a respite basis or a full-time basis, to piggyback on Sandra's piece, is you're never in it alone. We have a team of staff that are out in your home helping you day in and day out. If you ever need help, if you ever want help, it's a phone call away, 24/7. We're there to support you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because I'm sure people are feeling like, well, what do I do?
Parenting is hard. You know, we've all done it. Not many of us have done it, and it's just very, very hard.
Is there support groups for foster?
There are.
Yeah.
There are. So there's local support groups. There's online support groups these days, remote ones, agency-specific ones. There's all sorts of different support groups. So if you ever chose to be a foster parent, you're going to find a group of people who are in that exact same boat, who can share their experiences, and you can share yours safely in any different format. Spanish, English, all sorts of different languages, nonverbal.
And that was one of the things that I enjoyed in my experience as a foster parent, is that I looked to the more seasoned families for support, and I could call them anytime. And so in our agency, we do try to create that tight-knit community for the foster parents, so that if a new family has, they've just been licensed, for example, we want to make sure that they know that they're part of a community of families many of whom have gone through the process. They've seen a lot. Many of our families actually have fostered 10 plus years. So we have a lot of seasoned families. And so for me, that was huge, that I can call, a seasoned foster mom, and she'd laugh and say, that's just the beginning. That's okay, and that would sort of give me the motivation to keep going.
Yeah. What I find in the nonprofit world is passions lead the profession, right? You're in it, right? Mm-hmm. But you can have long days and you can have sad days. Mm-hmm. So for both of you, we'll go ladies first. Why do you do this? Why do you wake up every morning and do it?
It's interesting, and it's nice that you asked me. Like, you were in the field and you chose to be a foster parent. You brought my memory back to the days. And I think for me, the social service is so wide and so broad. Nonprofit is so wide and so broad. But I think the foster care system, the child welfare system, if you want to call it that way, there is such a unique and complex and pretty fascinating thought process around, these are the kids that are the most vulnerable because they're out of their family's home. And many of them don't have a lot of reasons as to how they ended up in care. And many of the families may not have had a lot of reasons why their child was removed, right? And so having the privilege, if you will, and the honor to support these families, we don't take it lightly because we're the voice for the child many times, we're the voice for the family many times, and we get to be the support system to sort of not just hold what's working together, but to get to a better resolution, including permanency. And so for me, I am here because there's nothing quite like that, right? Where if a kid is removed from home, their whole world is shattered. And so we want to be able to be sort of that constant, if you will, that safe person. We're not the family. We don't come in and replace a home, but we're certainly, we have that unique role where we can sort of look at them and normalize a lot of what they're experiencing and advocate so that they can achieve permanency and stability.
Yeah. How about you? I mean, I sometimes doing interviews ask people to remember what a kindergartner is like. They come on and they go, I painted today, I met a great friend, and like they had a great day. Yep. And so like, what's your great day? Like, what's your kindergartner moment, where you come home and da.
Well, I was going to say it's probably a different answer than Sandra's.
Really?
Because I just enjoy it. Every day is different. I can go in thinking I have a complete plan for what the day is going to look like, and then reality hits, and it gets turned upside down. I had a wonderful, wonderful kind of mentor in my early career who said, Craig, don't ever judge your sense of a good day, or don't judge whether you succeeded that day based on how the youth did. The youth might be having a very terrible day and calling you every name in the book, or running away, or all sorts of behaviors.
And that could be your own kid.
That absolutely true.
Yeah.
Judge your day on how you think you did. And I love what I do, and it's really based on kind of how I feel that I did that day, and I try to give it my all.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like we'd love to have more money, but we want more foster parents.
We absolutely want more foster parents. So anything we can do for foster parents. Now, what we can also talk about is there's all sorts of other ways to help support youth in the foster care system and support youth and families involved with Communities for People. So absolutely, by even considering foster care, have a conversation with us. That we'd love to do that. We're always looking for staff. So if you feel that you'd rather kind of work in the profession in a residential program or in one of those family-based programs, we'd love to see you consider that too. If it's like, nope, I don't like the nonprofit salary scale, I'm fine career-wise, but I might be willing to mentor a young person. I might be willing to have them come on weekends and share activities with us. That's another way. So sometimes we have people teach financial literacy classes. So you can volunteer in a whole bunch of different ways. So there's all sorts of ways. If the idea of foster care tugs at your heart, there's 100 different ways that we can have you help a kid.
Yeah. 5 years from now, where do you want to be with this?
So being part of Communities for People is I've never been with an agency like Communities for People. Craig has been with the agency, celebrated how many years, Craig?
More than a week.
40 years, I think.
40.
Started when you were a teenager. Nicely done.
And so I have the privilege of working with a strong team who, is supporting this agency to expand in ways that, probably 40 years ago, you would have never thought that we would have all the services that we have. So I think in 5 years, just, continuing along with our mission and thinking about what are other ways that we can create some new programming that helps support youth in care and foster parents, and expanding our staff, like Craig said, getting, new talent to join us, and supporting our teams and things like that. So just seeing where, how we evolve and grow as an agency, excites me.
So from here, the first step would be to go to your website.
Go to your website. I bet you those dozen ways that you could help change the life of a kid are right there on that website, www.communitiesforpeople.org.
And YouTube or Facebook, other things that people can follow you on?
Yep, I think we're on Facebook, Instagram. We do have a YouTube channel where there's some wonderful testimonials from youth and employees and foster parents.
Yeah, I want to thank you. I know we can talk for like another 2 weeks, but I do appreciate your time.
And thank you for applying to be a foster parent, Jay. We're going to have our social worker out there tomorrow.
Well, they got like dogs. Thank you.
Thank you.
One Big Boat is a production of Last Minute Productions Incorporated. This episode was produced by Jay Dobek. Ethan Gallo was the sound engineer. Jim Johnson provided production support. And Ryan Macheski was our show editor. Joanne Pallotta was a production coordinator.